Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. I'm Brendan Marcello, joined by Richard Johnson, and this is the segment everybody's been waiting for because Lane Kiffin is the hottest coaching commodity in college football. Everybody wants him, but nobody can have him. Or will they have them? Or will he just stay at Ole Miss? Of course, he's the name that's been most linked to the job at Florida. We've heard his name come up at LSU, but Florida's the one that's been, well, the team we've been needing to keep an eye on here closely. And of course, Ole Miss did play Florida and beat them this past week, 34-24 in a game that was a little bit closer than we were all expecting. But we're now entering a week here where Ole Miss is off. They're in a bye week, so there's going to be a lot of chatter, a lot of rumors about Lane Kiffin before they end their regular season against Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. Richard Johnson, where we stand right now, I'm of the viewpoint of like, there's no way to predict what Lane Kiffin's going to do because it's Lane Kiffin. But this does seem to be a legit situation where it almost seems 50-50 whether he's going to stay in Oxford or go to Gainesville and be the new Florida Gators head coach.
Yeah, how about we stick with the Ole Miss of it all first, right? Because this is, first of all, the second time he's done this, by the way. And by this, I mean run a potential new job situation up all the way into an Egg Bowl, which a lot of teams have rivals. Few have a rivalry like Ole Miss and Mississippi State. It is the Super Bowl. I understand all of Ole Miss's goals are still in front of them as far as the postseason, but that Egg Bowl matters. And this bye week, I think Ole Miss administrators, fans, other folks in sort of that Oxford bubble are going to turn up some heat on what are we doing here? Because this has happened before, again, with the Auburn job the last time it was open, where Lane flirted with Auburn very, very openly, took it all the way up until Thanksgiving week, until Egg Bowl week, and he has even said that it was a distraction at the time. Well, you're doing the same thing again. Because at the end of the day, if you really wanted to, you could sign the contract like Mike Elko did, and Kurt Cignetti did, and Matt Rhule did. And, you know, all these coaches that have signed these extensions and have gotten it out of the way and stayed where they're at. But you have Lane with this indecision, in addition to the way Lane's agent likes to conduct business, Jimmy Sexton at CAA, which is sort of using time as a leverage point. So you understand that that's the way they want to play the game. And that's fair. But if I'm Ole Miss, what are we doing here? Like, it's got to be a you-know-what or get off the pot at some point in time, because are we really going to let this continually be a distraction? We've given you everything you want as far as Ole Miss. We've upped our investment. We've certainly, obviously, gotten a team that can compete for a literal national championship, because that's what they're doing right now. What is it more that you want from us? What leverage are you trying to extract here? And so you can understand why Ole Miss folks are very frustrated. You can understand why the Secretary of State of Mississippi has been tweeting some things. You can understand why head of Ole Miss's athletic collective has been retweeting things. You can understand why that fan base is pretty upset right now, deservedly so.
Yeah, you mentioned it there. Ole Miss has been actively in discussions with Jimmy Sexton and their agency there to try to keep him there and keep him happy in Oxford. That's been going on for the better part of the last 4 weeks, I'm told. And Keith Carter there at the athletics department, they have put certain packages in front of him that would want him to stay there. But it certainly seems like that for Lane Kiffin, it's not about the money right now because he's going to get paid no matter what. But the situation is, can I go to a Florida where I'm not necessarily going to have to work as hard to get five-star talent? And I know year over year over year, I can become a dominant program that's contending for national championships and winning them rather than just having to, I hate to say scrape by in Mississippi, but it is just more difficult to get that type of talent there. Now, Lane Kiffin's personality and his offense, that draws a lot of attention. And I will say their collective, they've done a fantastic job these last 3 years in being able to attract players and keep them there through their monetary situation. But at Florida, the feeling is, and he has straight up said this publicly, in fact, this past week, that he's always just kind of sat there and dreamed about coaching a blue blood and being at a program like that, which if you're an Ole Miss fan, you got to sit there and go, dude, stop talking about other ladies out there. We're sitting here on the dance floor dancing with you right now, and you're whispering going, man, I sure wish I had a blonde. Like, come on, give me a break. We're having a nice dance moment here, a nice moment. Um, and we talk a lot about him maturing and all that, but it's still a situation where it's all about him still. It's just a different way, a different philosophy he's going about it. Because as you said, he's dragging this on and on where other coaches, including like Matt Rule, that's the one I really circle is this is a guy that had a chance to go back home and go coach the program that he played for. And that is a blue blood. And he said, you know what? Let's quiet this down. I'm done with this. We need to get this over with so I can keep recruiting and building here. Give me a contract to sign it. And meanwhile, Lane Kiffin's just kind of doing his own thing, just dancing there, going, look at me, look at me. Who wants to come join me? It's interesting. Do you think this gets settled this week, or do you think it goes all the way into the Egg Bowl?
It's interesting because if I'm Ole Miss, you're going to want to try to put him in between a rock and a hard place. If I'm Ole Miss, I say, Lane, if you say you're going to Florida, do you think we're just going to let you coach the college football playoff? Like, why would you let him do that? If I was a coordinator, then I think it'd be a little bit of a different story. Coordinators could kind of do both things. Famously, by the way, Lane did that when he was with Alabama at FAU, or with the FAU job, I should say, and it went so poorly that Saban got rid of him between the semifinal and the college football national championship game, and Sark took over, you will recall. So I do understand that it's just not palatable for a head coach to openly say, I'm taking a new job, and then for Ole Miss, I think you say, yeah, I think you tell him, you think you're going to coach this team through the playoff? You think you're going to continue here for another 3 weeks after the Egg Bowl, after you said openly, theoretically, that you're going to be the next head coach of the University of Florida? That's not what I would want if I was Ole Miss. That's an absolute slap in the face if I'm Ole Miss. That also then creates a situation on your roster where you may have guys that start looking elsewhere because they know their coach is not going to be there. And then Ole Miss may host a first round playoff game at home with a coach who says openly and signed a contract that another SEC rival. That's not how that works. Like, that would be such a cynical and ridiculous bad thing for the sport if Lane Kiffin were to say, I'm going to the Florida job, and then try to coach out the college football playoff at Ole Miss. I think that's ridiculous. So if I'm Ole Miss, I just keep trying to turn up the heat, and just kind of see what happens at that point in time.
You mentioned it. 2 of the last 3 times he's been in like a job situation, he's waited until like the last minute to do something, right? To make a decision, whether it was the Auburn job 3 years ago, or, and as you mentioned, when he was coaching at Alabama and got the FAU job, he just thought, well, I can just keep doing what I'm doing so I get me a ring. And Nick Saban's like, no, dude, this isn't working. You got to go. So I think he's just doing it a different way by being a little bit more open and like saying he's changed and all this. But it's still the same mindset. I think he's just like, let me get to the end of the regular season and then I'll make my decision. But that's just not how the rest of the world works. And he's asking the rest of the world to rotate around him right now. And he's a great coach. And Ole Miss is going to show more patience for that because they certainly don't want to lose him. But this is an interesting situation. I want to get real quick here on Shane Beamer at South Carolina. Shane Beamer now 1-7, I believe, in the SEC for the first time in 9 to 10 years. And they just lost to Texas A&M in historic fashion. They were up 30-3, lost 31-30. Is Shane Beamer in any sort of trouble here at South Carolina?
I wonder, just because that was so embarrassing on Saturday, the way that they were up, thought they had that game in the bag and were going to be able to do it, and then they just completely fell apart coming home. I do think South Carolina, though, is in a situation with Wisconsin, with Florida State, with Maryland, where it may be a little bit better to sit this out and try to put more resources in the roster and try to run this back rather than get on the coaching carousel that includes Auburn, Florida, LSU, maybe Ole Miss, we'll see. If I'm South Carolina, that's unpalatable to me. If I'm South Carolina, I try to run this back, bring Lenore Sellers back with all the talent in the world, and try to do this again. You don't just have to fire the guy.
And that's something else to watch. Lenore Sellers. There's been a lot of rumors about him and whether he might enter the transfer portal because there's one program out there in Miami that loves to take quarterbacks that have done very well and then slipped off their final year, and then they bring them on board there. just like they've done this year. So we'll see. All right, Richard Johnson, thanks for joining us. We're going to come back here on the College Football Insiders, and we're going to discuss what's going on at Baylor. Their athletics director taking a personal leave of absence and also stepping away from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Some interesting juice going on down there right after this. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. I am Brendan Marcello, joined by Shahan Jayaraja. And we're going to talk Baylor. Shahan's got a lot of connections there at Baylor. And athletics director Mack Rhoades late last week stepped away for a personal leave of absence. And Mack Rhoades, if that name sounds familiar to you, he's also was the chairman of the College Football Selection Committee, the face you would see on television every Tuesday night when they release their rankings. Well, he's also stepped away from there, and they've installed Arkansas Athletics Director Hunter Yurachek in his place to be the face of that committee. And this prompts a lot of questions. One, about the leadership that's going on there at Baylor in the future for the athletics department, but also for the seat of head coach Dave Aranda, who right now is sitting at 500 at 5-5. He's in a season here where his overall career record at Baylor is only 36-35, and they're coming off of a gigantic 55-28 loss to Utah. So, Shahan, what is the kind of overall state? Set the picture for me of what's going on at Baylor in the wake of all this happening at once.
Well, the short of it is that it's a mess, right? So obviously you don't have an athletic director right now. What they've said is that he's taking a leave of absence that could last up to 28 days. But talking to people around that program, here's the reality of the situation. He is under investigation for something outside. Now, this is not something criminal or necessarily something that has to do with wrongdoing in the athletic department, but it's something that does impact his long-term status as athletic director. So people that I talk to do not expect him back as athletic director, but what that could mean is that they could be looking to fire him for cause. And if that's the case, that's a process that could take a couple of weeks. You bring up the status of Dave Aranda as Baylor's football coach. Well, his final game of the season is on November 29th, which is sooner than obviously a couple of weeks. They're going to have to make a decision on him, and they're going to have to make a decision on the athletic director. And if they make decisions on both of those people, they're going to have to bring in a new athletic director and a new head coach. So the question becomes, can they get all of that stuff done in a very expedited time frame? People that I talk to around Baylor are skeptical of that. They think that what this is probably going to look like is the athletic director ultimately separating from the school, but the new leadership probably being unable to make a change at head coach at this moment. Because here's the reality of the situation too, is that I don't think that Baylor is especially impacted by this busy market, because I think they're a little bit in a market of their own with maybe some of the Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas schools. But if you are behind the 8 ball heading into this market, and if you lose out on all of your top candidates because Oklahoma State or Arkansas or any one of these schools take them, well, again, are you going to be hiring a head coach at the beginning of January? Are you going to be doing an athletic director search that could obviously last for a little while? It really complicates actually the ability to fire Dave Aranda more than it does impact his status.
Yeah, let's remember last season, heading into last season, Dave Aranda was on the hot seat, needed to do something. They end up winning 8 games. It cooled things down. And now they're kind of just teetering back on that edge of falling back down the hill a little bit. They stand at 5-5, as I said, 3-4 in the Big 12 right now. And if they were to have a losing season, this would be a losing record in 4 of his 6 seasons leading the program. And of course, year 2 there was with the big breakthrough where they went 12-2, Big 12 championship, as we all know. But ever since then, it's just been kind of ebbing and flowing. It's about like a 6-win program is what they're pretty much averaging there. What is Baylor capable of in this new age, you think, Shahan?
Well, certainly a lot more than this. Let's start with that. I think that when you look at this program, again, I mean, there was talk back in 2021 when Texas and Oklahoma announced that they were leaving the conference, that this was going to be one of, if not the signature programs in this Big 12 conference. From a financial perspective, they are up there with everybody. They're fully funded. They've got good backing. From a resource and talent acquisition perspective, they're in great shape. Even with this miserable season, season, they have a top 25 recruiting class, one of the best that they've had in a while in Waco. So this is a program that, look, I'm not saying should win 10 games every year, but should probably at least be in contention for 8 wins every single year. To be sitting here as a 500 team at best across the entire Aranda era is just frankly unacceptable. I mean, people, of course, will remember, the pre-2008 days, right, where Baylor under Guy Morris and Kevin Steele and all these guys, where they really struggled. They were one of the worst programs in the sport. The difference between that moment and this moment is the level of investment is completely different now. They have a stadium that is still state of the art, only built 10 years ago. They have a new football performance center. They have fully funded rev share. They've been much more aggressive in the past year or two to get there. If you need any sort of indication of how much they've invested in this athletic department, I mean, look at what Scott Drew's got on the basketball side as well. And they very much view those as the flagships of this university. So it's a weird position to be in, but this Baylor job is capable of a lot more than what Dave Aranda has given them.
So do you think, in your personal opinion, that they would be better off kicking the can down the road on Dave Aranda until next year and make a decision, just because, as you said, with the coaching market and then also just the stability or lack thereof in the athletics department, because we don't know who's leading that department. I mean, heck, they've got 2 people installed as interim ADs right now. So they're not even looking to one person at this moment.
So here's the thing, right? If they had an average season, a decent season, 7 or 8 wins, I think that you can sell that. It's becoming a lot harder to lose by 27 points at home to Utah, to play Arizona and Houston in 2 games that you're going to be underdogs in. If you miss a bowl game, this is not a conversation. Like, you just have to make that decision. So, I mean, I honestly am sympathetic for them. I mean, it is a tough position to be in because of the athletic director situation, but it's gotten bad enough that I still think personally you have to make a change and deal with the logistical hurdles.
It's a fascinating situation there in Waco. Shahan, thanks for joining us to discuss this. Coming up after the break, we're going to be joined by John Talty to discuss Maryland, where Mike Locksley went from hot seat to safe with a better investment in the program coming up into this season. Are they taking a page out of the Indiana blueprint? More on that on the College Football Insiders after this. Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. I'm Brandon Marcel. I'm joined by John Talty. We're going to discuss Maryland, an interesting situation there where, as we've seen in the past under Mike Locksley, they start hot and then they fade. And they started 4-0 this year. They lost 6 straight after this past week. They're now 1-6 in the Big Ten Conference. His overall coaching record there is 37-47. He's been there since 2019. And you wonder, like, well, he's certainly a hot seat coach, right? Well, their athletics director over the weekend says, hey, no, that's not the case. We're going to keep Mike Locksley here, and we're going to invest more into the program and try to get this thing right on the road in the Big Ten. And our John Talty is plugged in as anyone there at Maryland. John, I know you wrote a story about all of this situation a week or two ago, and of course have followed up on it since this announcement, but did this surprise you at all that Maryland decided we're going to stick with Mike Locksley another season?
The decision did not surprise me. The timing slightly did, but looking back on it, I think it was smart in the sense that I think, AD Jim Smith and the people around him realized that if you keep losing, that outside noise gets bigger and bigger and bigger, which was already happening in College Park. And so, I had talked to some people around the situation, and the preference by far over and over again that I heard was, we'd like to find a way to bring Mike back next year. We'd like to give him more resources to be successful. Especially, it's important to note that Jim Smith and his team have only been there a few months. And so I don't think they were eager to have to conduct a coaching search in this crowded market. But I think the fear was that if he lost out and you're 4-8 after starting 4-0, is the fervor so strong that you get pushed to make a decision? So I think coming out now and saying we're keeping him, we're giving him more money, we're going to invest more in this program, prevents your hand from getting forced later on if you do lose out and finish 4-8.
When you've spoken to Mike Locksley several times, and of course the athletics director there, what kind of blueprint or plan do we see for the future of Maryland next season? What exactly are they going to really invest in and concentrate on?
Well, for one, I've been told that they have been able to attract significant NIL resources, new NIL resource beyond what they have had in the past. And so Maryland historically in the NIL era has been way behind the times from a lot of their peer institutions. And so Jim Smith and his team, that's been a major priority. I mean, Jim's a business guy. They hired someone who was the former president of Charlotte FC. Like, these people were hired to generate revenue, go out and get new money. And I've been told they've been able to do that. And so I think the thought process is we've been so behind in so many different ways, not only from an NIL standpoint, but just in a program investment standpoint. I think it was almost shocking to me when I was pulling the data that Rutgers, for instance, doubles up Maryland in terms of money spent on football. They're at the 60+ million mark. Maryland's at 30. Indiana has doubled their investment over the last 5 years. So I think Maryland sees a place like Indiana and says, all right, it's not just Curt Cignetti who's made that place work. They have made a conscious decision over the last 4 years to invest more and more into that program, and it has worked. And so I think their thought is, we've got a guy here who's a Maryland guy. He's attracting good young talent. Can we give him more resources to try to get him over the hump where we can be more of that top end of the Big Ten? And if it's not, if they give him a ton of NIL money and they have another 4 and 8 year next year, well, then that makes the decision pretty easy.
I'm going to throw out, this isn't necessarily a wild scenario, but I wonder, Maryland's sitting there right now, and you hear all the chatter with James Franklin and Virginia Tech. Do you think that played into their decision at all of, hey, it certainly looks like we are probably too far behind on trying to entice a James Franklin type to Maryland if we were to make a change?
I don't know that Franklin was ever a serious candidate for Maryland, even if they were to have moved on from Mike Locksley. I think he is someone who has obvious ties there. He had been an assistant there multiple times, but I think there was a little bit of maybe mutual bad blood over the fact he was at one point the head coach in waiting. They switched ADs. New AD didn't want to give him the job. He has, seemed to delight in torturing Maryland while he was Penn State's head coach. So I don't know that he would have wanted to take that job, even if it were to open. But I do know that this is a smart administration. They are aware of where the industry stands. And I think that they knew, like, if we were to make a move, if we're forced to make a move, it's a very crowded market. And where does our job maybe fall in those rankings, especially with a Penn State open, with a Virginia Tech open? Those are two in your geographic footprint. So I think that was maybe not the primary factor, but I think it was a factor in realizing, let's try to, kick this can down the road a year, see if more money can lead to better results. And if not, we'll be better positioned a year from now if we have to go into the coaching market.
This might be a bigger discussion for another day, but I do wonder if there's something to say about the Big Ten seemingly being a little bit more even keel and more patient among some of their decision-making here. Of course, not Penn State. They made that change with James Franklin. But you see with Matt Rhule at Nebraska, hey, I'm going to stay here. Curt Cignetti at Indiana, hey, I'm going to stay here. You've got Wisconsin saying, hey, we're going to sit tight and invest in the program and give our coach another year. And you're seeing it at Maryland with Mike Locksley. Meanwhile, you look at the SEC, and it just seems like, we got to do something. We got to blow it all up. Is there something to that? Do you think it's just everybody in that same bubble up there going, this is kind of how we're all going to do business, and let's respect each other?
I think it's a cultural thing. I really do. And I think sometimes, as they say, all politics are local politics, but I think every school has their own different dynamic. But I do think, and I think wrote this recently, like, you know this well, Brandon, like in the SEC, sometimes the job of the AD is to try to hold off the boosters from trying to buy out your coach. Whereas like at some of these bigger schools in the Big Ten, I think there's just more patience and less demand. Like Maryland, for instance, like their boosters give money, but they don't try to throw their weight around to get guys fired. That's just not kind of their personalities. Where, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, wherever, like things start going poorly, your biggest boosters are going to let you know about it. And I think at the Big Ten level, there's just maybe a little bit more patience and less desire to have to be involved in that stuff.
It's a very fascinating discussion. I think we'll probably try to expand on that in a future episode of the College Football Insiders. John Talty, thanks for joining us and discussing all things Maryland in the Big Ten. When we come back on the College Football Insiders around this break, we're going to talk about college football playoff chaos scenarios with 2 weeks left in the regular season with our Chris Hummer. Welcome back to College Football Insiders. I am Brendan Marcello. Chris Hummer is joining me to talk college football playoff. Why wait until the next rankings come out when we could just tell you everything that's going to happen today on the show, right, Chris?
Exactly. Nothing
All right,
surprising has ever happened in the college football playoff.
oh, yeah, exactly. So let's get into scenarios here. The SEC, we saw OU make this big jump, of course, after beating Alabama. And then the SEC's in a situation where it looks like they're going to get 5 teams in, maybe. Could they get 6? Could we be in a situation here where the SEC has 6 teams with 2 losses or less? And we're discussing the SEC making up half of the 12-team field in the playoff.
Brandon, I could see a scenario where Greg Stinky's out there stumping for 7. Like, there's a world in which you have 6, 10-2 teams, or slightly better in a couple cases, and then Texas at 9-3 coming off a win over A&M in the regular season finale. Like, that is like, if that game happens and if Vanderbilt wins out, you're going to see the SEC stumping for 7, and it's fascinating. I think 5 is absolutely the number you should probably expect. If you look at the Vegas odds right now, 5 SEC teams are favored to get in: A&M, Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma. But like, I really do think there's going to be an argument out there if Texas beats Arkansas and A&M and Vanderbilt wins out over Kentucky and Tennessee, for those teams to get in the field too. And given the strength of schedules, like, nobody's going to have worse than like the 30th strength of schedule in that league. They're going to at least have an argument for it, and we know how Greg Sankey is going to handle that.
So you're saying that we could see 6, 7, maybe a 6, 7,
okay. 6, 7, Brandon. Yeah.
Let's move over to the Big Ten, where this league has looked like a 3-bid league most of the year. It looks like it's going to be Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon, if Oregon can continue to win here. But could we see a situation where it gets a 4th bid, especially if USC goes up to Oregon this week and upsets the Ducks?
Absolutely. I'd be very curious what happens if you basically have a 6th SEC team or a 5th SEC team versus a 4th Big Ten team. Who wins out in that scenario? Because I think USC and Michigan are both very alive for the playoff. You mentioned USC's big game with Oregon. If USC beats Oregon and beats UCLA, I don't think you can really keep them out. Like, their only losses would be Notre Dame and a big one
Illinois.
in Illinois. Yeah. So a team that could very easily finish in the top 20 as well. And then Michigan's out there hanging as a real contender, lost to Oklahoma, obviously. But they could win over Ohio State, the #1 team in the playoff rankings, in addition to the game against Maryland. And I have a really hard time seeing a 10-2 Big Ten team, especially one of those 2 brands, being left out of the playoff if they finish the regular season out.
Yeah, because you mentioned Michigan. I mean, if you went out, and I know it sounds crazy to some, but they've beaten Ohio State 4 straight years, including in a game last year where I don't think anybody saw that happening, with Michigan beating Ohio State, which, of course, the Buckeyes went on to win the national championship. But Michigan did that on the road in the shoe, and now Ohio State's got to come to the big house. They're at Michigan this year in 2 weeks, and they've got their number. So don't discount that possibility. All right. The ACC and the Big 12 are in situations where it seems like for most of the year we've just been saying they're 1-bid leagues. It's going to be their conference champion. Is that still the case, especially in the ACC, where we've got 4 teams with 1 loss atop the standings?
I think the ACC path is difficult but possible. Miami is the kind of the team hanging out there, right? Like, Miami's ranked ahead of several other ACC contenders and kind of positioned to reach the ACC championship game, but Miami shot itself in the foot with its 2 losses. They put themselves in a very difficult position. But if you see some of those SEC teams lose down the stretch, maybe a Notre Dame lose down the stretch, I think Miami becomes a real possibility. But because the tiebreaker situation makes it almost impossible for Miami to make the ACC championship game, Miami put itself in a really tough spot. And if that's the case and Miami doesn't get in, I have a really hard time seeing another non-champion getting in from the ACC.
But so should Miami, there's an argument out there, should Miami be above Notre Dame right now? I've had people ask that.
I think Notre Dame's playing better right now, but I personally would respect the head-to-head and I'd flip them. But I think when the playoff committee is looking at the totality of resume and the quality of wins recently, and who Miami lost to in addition to that. Like, I know Notre Dame lost to Miami earlier in the year, but Notre Dame's two losses are to Miami and Texas A&M, one of the hottest teams in the country. I think you could strongly argue Notre Dame is playing better, and I understand it. And I think by the end of the season, Notre Dame would probably still maintain that ranking if they finish out unbeaten. So it's a really sticky situation for the committee, but I certainly understand having Notre Dame there.
And what about the Big 12? We mentioned that potentially just being a one-bid league with their conference champion. Texas Tech certainly seems to be the class of the Big 12. They're just absolutely obliterating everybody after suffering their first loss of the season. There's still some very good teams there in the Big 12, but they seem to have been hurt because, as we've seen in the past, they just beat up on each other. Especially the teams that came into the season of us expecting them to be playoff contenders, say like an Arizona State, where they've had to suffer through some injuries and then obviously some losses. Iowa State, which started the season in a situation where they could be a playoff contender, then they end up losing games. Does the Big 12 deserve more than one team in there? Does their Big 12 runner-up deserve to be in that situation?
I think possibly, but it would be contingent on BYU or Utah running the table, which likely means a win over Texas Tech. In the conference championship game, things can get really convoluted for the Big 12 if Cincinnati beats BYU this weekend. I think at that point you have the opportunity for a five-way tie for that last spot. I think Utah wins in that scenario. If Utah runs the table, finishes 10-2, I don't think they're probably going to make the playoff. But if Utah runs the table, makes the Big 12 championship game, finishes 11-2, beats Texas Tech, I think absolutely the Big 12 deserves that bid. I think the problem for the Big 12 is Utah lost so badly to Texas Tech, it makes you have a hard time making that argument.
Yeah, and you got a Utah program right now that is in a continuous stretch of just scoring points at seemingly at will. They're scoring points at a blistering pace we haven't seen there since 2004 when Urban Meyer was patrolling the sideline. They're scoring 50-something points in the last couple of games. They scored 55 against Baylor this past week, and I think that Big 12 race is going to be very, very, very fascinating. And the championship game, especially if we end up getting one that's Texas Tech and BYU and Texas Tech and Utah, could be fascinating to watch because I almost feel like Tech is going to be in no matter what as long as they don't lose in the regular season the rest of the way, because of the resume they've been able to put up in the love we've been having for them. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us this week on the College Football Insiders. Make sure to keep up with us on YouTube. Our show goes up there at night as well. And for everybody here at the College Football Insiders, thanks for joining us. We will be back next Monday. Make sure to also go to cbssports.com for the latest scoop and intel across the country as we enter here in Week 13 down the stretch of this fantastic college football season. We'll see you down the road.